Hello, everyone. This is Mason Richey again for the Asia Society Korea. We are absolutely happy to have you to join us here for another one of our roundtables, this one for November. I am absolutely thrilled to be able to say that we have two experts who have agreed to join us today to talk about the world of open source intelligence collection and analysis, notably with respect to North Korea, as most of you can probably imagine. Without any further ado, I'm going to jump right into it, and I'm going to introduce our two guest experts today. I will say one thing very briefly, which is that we're going to do something a little bit different. As most of you know, usually we run this primarily as a roundtable format where the experts are asked a few questions to sort of get things started, and then the conversation is relatively informal and driven primarily by questions and dialogue back and forth. This time, given the nature of the subject matter, as you'll see, which is in some cases highly visual, we felt that maybe we would go in a slightly different direction and have a bit more of a presentation format. We are going to open this up for some questions at the end, of course, but we're going to do something a little bit different and have our two experts have a chance to show off some of their expertise. So just to introduce our speakers real quick, and I'll be kind of quick about it. You can read their full bios on the Asia Society Korea website. We have Melissa Hanham, who is the Deputy Director of the Open Nuclear Network, a program of One Earth Future. She also directs the Datayo Project. She is an expert on weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, their delivery devices, missiles, bombers, that sort of thing. And she studied both North Korea and China's weapons of mass destruction program for over a decade. She's also an expert on open source intelligence, satellite and aerial imagery, remote sensory data, large data sets, social media, 3D modeling, GIS mapping, and is particularly focused on monitoring and verification of international arms control agreements using open source evidence. She's an affiliate also of Stanford University CSAC, the Center for International Security and Cooperation, and is a regular contributor to Arms Control Wonk, which is the leading blog and podcast on disarmament, arms control, and nonproliferation. We're also joined by David Schmerler, who is a senior research associate at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. His areas of research and expertise include North Korea's missile and nuclear program, Iran's missile and nuclear program, geospatial analysis, East Asian security, 3D modeling analysis, open source analysis. He has a BA in political science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, go Illini, and holds an MA in nonproliferation and terrorism studies from the Monterey Institute of International Studies. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to them and let them wow you with their expertise. So in particular, they're going to be talking a little bit about how they go about doing open source collection and intelligence analysis. So I'm going to turn the Zoom share screen feature over to Melissa, who is going to get us started. Thanks to both of you for joining us. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me and also having Dave on. I used to work with Dave at the James Martin Center. So one of the things that we worked on together is analysis of a site in North Korea called Kangsan. And because we both worked on it, I thought maybe we could tell the story a little bit of how we worked in a team at James Martin Center with Jeffrey Lewis to discover the location of the site. Am I sharing correctly? Does not look right to me. No? Sorry. Oh. I'm gonna go back to the old way of sharing.
There we go, that's fine.
The site where Kangsan is located is an interesting place, not too far from Pyongyang. But CNS did not start the search. This story started before we got involved, and I wanted to pay credit there. So David Albright at the Institute for Science and International Security released a PDF slideshow, which I've put the link on there for you if you want to look at yourself, where he analyzes a series of different places related to uranium enrichment. And he's very clear that he's not found it and he's not confirmed that it's for uranium enrichment. And there are multiple sites, but of all the sites, there is one called Kansong with a G on the end that has the most relevant and useful information around it. But from this, he sort of states around how many centrifuges there might be there. He states that it's been in operation for several years, and several other tidbits of information in that slide deck, which are really interesting for people who otherwise may not know about this place, like me at the time. And quickly we start getting news leaks. So the officials that David Albright refers to also show up in other news outlets. These are unnamed officials. And by July 1st, NBC News has a leak with more than a dozen officials at the CIA and other intelligence agencies that are now confirming that Kansong is a believed uranium enrichment facility, along with potentially some other sites. Ankit Panda, first with NK Pro and then with the Diplomat, really focus on this issue. And NK Pro finally announces that there was a spelling error in the romanization of the Korean word. And so lots of people who had been looking for Kansong actually should have been looking for Kansong, and that makes the search a lot easier. And this is where we get involved, because Ankit has these blind sources, but he's writing this piece for the Diplomat, and he wants to know what we can do in open source. So he comes to Jeffrey Lewis and Dave and I and several others like Grace Liu and Catherine Dill at CNS to start looking for this facility and try to either prove or disprove what's been mentioned so far. I don't know if Dave, if you want to jump in on any of this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So essentially we take some of the information that was published and some of the work that David Albright did, and we try to create a like multi-pronged search parameter of locations where we think it might be. And then what all of us at CNS started doing was picking locations that looked really interesting or suspicious, and then we started to essentially dox them. We wanted to know, do we have travel photos of this building? Have the North Koreans put videos of this facility online, or have they broadcasted it on a KCNA in some fashion or form on the various mediums that they operate in? So we created a wide search parameter, and then we started checking locations off the list, because if this site is as sensitive as it is made out to be, then the North Koreans wouldn't be as forward about showing pictures of the site. If it's solely dedicated towards enriching uranium, then we're not going to get pictures of that, because we really haven't seen many photos like that outside of sources from the IAEA.
And so with the corrected name, we now know we're looking at a smaller area near the Taedong River. And we can now start sort of understanding previous visits that may have been made to this by North Korean officials, including Kim Jong-un, and we start mapping all this out. And eventually through this, I mean, still quite brute force method of identifying different locations and then literally ruling them out. Like, you know, Jeffrey was on the phone with me some day saying, like, I just X'd out that building because even though it met all the conditions where a facility might be a uranium enrichment facility, I discovered it had a different purpose using open source. And so through this kind of brute force searching and process of elimination, we come to this particular facility here that is annotated by CNS for the Diplomat. And this is using Planet Imagery. And Planet Imagery is great because it has high frequency data, so you can really see you know, shipping containers, other vehicle activity around here. over time. But the downside of Planet is that their archive really only goes back to 2014 when they started as a company and put up images for the first time. So we're kind of stuck a little bit there for a bit. But just to describe the site, you can see here that we've identified this large boxy building here as a probable enrichment hall. Enrichment halls are really tough because they don't have to be a particular shape or size. They can be buried underground, they can be in a tunnel, and they just look like large industrial facilities. So we have to pick our language really carefully when we say this is, the reason we've got probable here is we cannot confirm that it is indeed an enrichment site. But there are several clues that make us believe that it is probably a site. First, the location based on what David Albright already described. We also see that there is a security perimeter all the way around, which is conducive to a military site of some kind. We also see that there are monuments set up here, indicating that Kim Jong-un or his father, depending on the timeline, which we are not yet sure of, have visited the site, indicating its importance. And then you generally do see administrative and housing that is also secured in the general area. But none of this says officially this is an enrichment site. And today we officially can't say that it is an enrichment site because there really aren't any other known signatures from satellite imagery that can help you determine this. You need some other information from another place.
Can I just jump in for a second and ask a couple of small questions? The first of which is, where, I mean, I know you said you get these from Planet images, but, you know, where do they come from? Can you talk about, you know, what this company does? I mean, do they send the satellites up themselves? Do they own the satellites? And how do you know which images to ask for? I mean, how do you not get a picture of a field somewhere in Namibia, or, you know, the picture of, you know, I don't know, the North Pole or whatever? Do you need to tell them coordinates and then they can give you pictures of specific places, or anyway? And more generally, in this particular case, it seems like you've gotten, for lack of a better term, a tip, or you've been given a sort of a path to follow from David Albright and then Ankit Panda. But, you know, absent that type of thing, how do you know what to look for? Like, you know, if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, you know, where do you start looking in the haystack, so to speak? And then thirdly, can you maybe tell us a little bit about the resolution of these images so that we're able to see? Because I mean, you say this is a security perimeter, but to me it looks like it might just be some nice trees on the side of a road. So how do you sort of figure out what these objects are that you're looking at?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, Dave and I have looked at these types of facilities for a long time. So it is practice over time. Typically when I am looking for somewhere that I don't know where to start, I try to find contextual clues that will help me. In this case, we had the hint from unnamed intelligence officials saying Kansong, as reported by David Albright and also by Ankit Panda. So we knew the area where we should be looking. That's still a large search area, so we did brute force, basically have to go from large warehouse to large warehouse to large warehouse looking, and could not rule out that this wasn't buried underground like Natanz was in Iran, or in the side of a tunnel or a mountain like Fordow, for example. So we couldn't rule out any of those things, and we did not know if we would find it or not. Planet is an American satellite company, relatively new to the game, but very disruptive to the way we receive satellite imagery. So in the old days with Digital Globe, which is now Maxar, you would give a latitude and a longitude, or what we call an AOI, area of interest, to a salesperson. And that salesperson would charge you money, and then they'd give you the picture, and you would hope that that picture had something useful in it because you just blew a lot of money. Planet has one of the first interfaces where you can browse their entire digital catalog streaming on their website, and that's called Planet Explorer. So at CNS, we had Planet Explorer accounts, and they do have a lot of opportunities for people in research and in journalism, and you should reach out for discounted or free options to stream these. The resolution of the photo, in this particular one, I think it is probably 3 meters. Oh no, this is probably 70 centimeters. Yeah. This one's probably a 70 centimeter imagery. So Planet has several. Dave, do you want to jump in on this? I'm sorry to be chattering.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. I mean, you were about to get into it, but I can take it from there. So yeah, Planet has one of the largest private satellite fleets in the world. If not, I think they do, for satellite imagery. They're taking a picture of almost the entire world every day with a fleet of somewhere around 200 Dove satellites, which are really cool. They're like the size of a shoebox, and they give you 3-meter resolution imagery. And we're going to look into some of that maybe later on in the presentation. But they have a smaller or a better, higher resolution set of satellites called SkySats. And they also do a high frequency coverage, but you can also operate with Planet and try to get areas of interest to work with that. And I think, yeah, this is definitely a SkySat. So we're looking at like 0.5 meters to 0.75 meter resolution or 75 centimeter resolution.
Can you explain what that means?
Oh, sure. So the resolution shows you what the actual ground size is per pixel in an image. So the better the resolution, the smaller that number will be. So if you get 3 meters resolution, one pixel is 3 meters, and it's going to look a little bit blurry. It's really good for watching macro site activity. So if you want to see if buildings are going up or buildings are going down in places that are interesting, you can use 3-meter imagery. But if you need more granular details to make the type of analysis that we all did at CNS on the site, it's better to have a finer point resolution. And then onto one of the questions you asked earlier about like how you can make out like certain perimeter fencing and things like that. When you're working with satellite imagery, even though like I love working with Planet Labs, you have to use a bunch of different sources. So we're also working with Airbus, we're working with Maxar. Google Earth is a great tool, and the resolution there is pretty fine point. So when you're comparing certain features, it might not be apparent that there's a perimeter in 75 centimeters, but if you go below 75 to like 50 or 30, you can make out better details to assess what the site's composition is.
So in this case, we've drawn a big dotted line over the security perimeter too, which does not help, but essentially speaking, we could have a blurrier image of the same place every single day, which is very rare and exotic for us. Or we could have this level sharpness occasionally when the right kind of satellite passes over it. And you can get even sharper images than this from other companies. And as Dave is describing, you sort of sift through. But we always start with Planet because it's more affordable and rapid to search through what is available. And then if you want to spend the money or you have access to some of the even higher resolution satellites, then you can do that. Google Earth, as Dave mentioned, is another really great option because they already have formerly Digital Globe, Maxar imagery, Airbus imagery on there. It's just hit or miss because those satellites are more sharp but less frequent to fly over the place you want. So a lot of times we're challenged where we want to see something on a specific day and they won't have it, but Planet will have it, and it's just not as sharp. And you find the right balance.
Are you just out of luck if the satellite flies over and there's clouds, or I mean, is it just oops? I mean, there's nothing that can be done, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. For optical imagery, yes, you are out of luck. So optical imagery relies on sunlight to bounce off of stuff. And if the sunlight's bouncing off of clouds, then you can't see anything. But there are other types of imagery that are available now. One is called synthetic aperture radar. And so this is an active signal that bounces off of the ground and is received again. So that does pierce clouds. And that's a really excellent tool, also very expensive and difficult to get, but is becoming much more available. So there's a new company that's starting to make it more available called Capella Space. And I think they're trying to do what Planet did to some of the older, more established firms, but with synthetic aperture radar instead of optical imagery.
Last little question for this little part of me interrupting you. I should let you both get back to actually talking about your presentation. But other than outfits like yours, who else is using this type of data? Is this like for commercial purposes that companies want to look at places in the world, or I mean, who else is using this?
Satellite imagery is becoming a more vital part of a bunch of different sectors outside of the nonproliferation research circle. So if you're doing general security studies, you can use satellite imagery. Groups like Bellingcat will do work on that. You've got other organizations that do tangential work on the same area, but not necessarily the same focus. So you can look at, parallel with CSIS, you can look at 38 North or NK News, who also do this work as well, on top of, ISIS, the Albright's. And then you can also use satellite imagery for things like agricultural studies. If you want to use more than your basic 3 visual bands, you can try to elevate features in, let's say, crops with satellite imagery to indicate whether or not they're healthy, or if you need to bring attention to a certain area without actually having to go all over your field and study it. You can also use satellite imagery for commercial purposes as well. So if you're interested in trying to track or monitor ships, or let's say oil production and oil shipping, you can also use satellite imagery for that as well.
Okay.
So I mean, I think it's safe to say that the largest consumer of satellite imagery is the U.S. government. So a lot of the companies are catering to what the U.S. government is interested in, but it's definitely not all military. So those use cases that Dave just outlined are some of the prime areas where satellite imagery is finding commercial use. Things like agriculture, oil and gas exploration, civil engineering, traffic.
Disaster relief actually is one of the best case studies for the use of satellite imagery, because you have an area that was hit by, let's say, a tsunami or a tropical storm or even a forest fire. It's really hard to send people to cover the entire area and track where the damage is. But using satellite imagery and the archival feature, you can compare that and use change detection algorithms to figure out which areas have changed the most and require the most attention.
Okay. I'll let you guys get back to your presentation. I've interrupted you enough. Nobody wants to hear me talk, so.
Anyway, so I mean, one of the things you can do with Planet is you can check the same location frequently. And one of the things that we find particularly useful in northern latitudes or very southern latitudes is winter. So when things get covered in snow, then you can start to see what is most important because it's dug out or the building is heated and so on. So what we could see here in the winter months in North Korea was that consistently the place we thought was a plausible centrifuge hall had no snow on the roof. It was probably heated, and that the roads in and out of that area were well cleared. Now you can see this image is not nearly as sharp as the one I showed you in the last slide. So this is an example of 3-meter resolution, which is the most common kind of imagery you would get from a planet, 3 to 4 meter resolution. And this gives us a chance to see what the pattern of life is like at this place. So we can monitor more frequently what is happening here. How active is the site? How often do we see vehicles on a parking lot or something like that? Those kinds of activities are really useful for us. But it still didn't go back very far because we didn't have that pre-2014 time period. So we still needed to purchase imagery. In this case, we bought it from Digital Globe, now Maxar, and we purchased this imagery just as you stated. We had an area of interest with a latitude, longitude, and so on. And we wanted to go back as far in time to see when this facility was built, so we could get a sense of A, how old the facility, how many years it could have been operating, enriching uranium. And also, if you're very lucky, sometimes you capture images mid-construction where you can see basically the floor plans of the place that they're building. And at the time, we were running a program called Geo for Non-Pro. So this was hosted on the website, and people were invited to come and annotate and comment on the facility itself. So we were able to get these different images available for people to examine. And so this image is dated 2002. So it means that this facility is indeed well over a decade old, and that it matches very much with the description of the US intelligence officials about when it was built and how long it was around. Just to close the story, you may have heard that it's in the news again. So, you know, at the time, this, you know, we gave our findings to UNKIT, and they were published in the Diplomat, and that was sort of the end of the story for a while. David Albright did write again in 2018. I think he had a rebuttal on some of our points and so on, but ultimately what we found just last week was that Grossi, who's the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, responding to a press question, said that they are trying to fine-tune the analysis on Kangsan, which is the first time I have ever heard the IAEA reference the facility. And they can see that it is a relevant facility, which means that it is something that the IAEA is actively investigating. Should North Korea ever agree to the inspection, and that would be a complex political and diplomatic activity, because we know that the North Koreans believe they've withdrawn from the NPT, then Grossi and others could bring in information from the ground and do an inspection like other states which are part of the NPT. Without that physical access, then they, a little bit like us, rely on remote sensing data to monitor a facility, as well as state level information from other participating states, which they then try to corroborate or diffuse. And
I guess if nothing else, I mean, even if, you know, even outside of the framework of the NPT, if in some counterfactual hoped for world the U.S. were to manage to wrangle North Korea into you know, into some type of deal that would involve inspections, this would be one that presumably the U.S. would ask to look for, and that we would sort of expect that to be a part of some type of deal or an agreement. And, you know, even if the IAEA, you know, can't look at it through the NPT framework, perhaps, you know, either the U.S. or perhaps could task the IAEA with doing that. So there's some value there, I guess.
Yeah, there's not a lot of knowledge about exactly where things went wrong in Hanoi, but I see it plausible that this was one of the facilities that derailed it, because North Korea was willing to offer up Yongbyon according to the rumors of the situation, but Trump wanted more. He wanted all of the facilities. And so we know about an enrichment site at Yongbyon thanks to Sig Hecker, who actually visited the site. But this and potentially the other sites outside have never been visited. And I guess, you know, plausibly the US was going for this really maximalist position, and that could have been what brought it down. But again, I'm in the open source, so I don't know exactly what was said during those meetings.
Yeah, maybe that was a part of the alpha, so to speak. So do you want to leave that alone for now, Kangsan, and go to the next topic, or do we have anything else that we need to cover on that? Maybe David, if you want to say something else about Kangsan, or if you want to move on to something else.
I mean, I would love to get more information on it, but I agree with everything Melissa said. We're just working with open source material. So it's a really interesting site. It's very unique, but kind of covering the points we mentioned earlier, it's the signatures for this type of facility are very few compared to like a missile production facility or things of that nature, which are much more identifiable.
Why is that? What makes a missile production facility more identifiable than an enrichment facility?
Specifically for North Korea, because everyone builds their production facilities slightly differently. North Korea has a very tall and wide approach to missile production facilities. They're usually testing equipment that are nearby, so when they assemble the missile, they can put it out and try to test it. Yeah, so I guess like Sanamdong, for example, that was something we found I think in 2014, 2015, was a area that was associated with space research, and then they built this giant, large series of structures that facilitate the horizontal and vertical assembly of a space launch vehicle and missiles that are possibly or partially related. And for that type of activity, I'll even show you with the teleproduction facility, my next set of slides, they tend to look just very strange, like very tall, very wide, kind of towery next to a larger production hall. So I think that's more of like the time I put in just building reference and experience with identifying different sites, but they're much more unique.
If I can get away with two last dumb questions before we maybe go to the TEL facility and have you show us some slides on that. My first one is there something like a national style, let's say, in weapons of mass destruction production? I mean, I realize, nuclear technology and missiles are old, right? I mean, we've had, nuclear bombs for, 7 decades, right? And, missiles for even, or rockets at least, for a bit longer than that. So there's an old technology in a certain way, but, it's literally rocket science. It is nuclear physics. It's not the easiest thing in the world, even though it's old. And I guess I can imagine that once you figure out how to do this stuff, there might be some path dependence built in where you have a sort of style. And is there, for instance, a difference between the way that Iran does it versus North Korea, or a difference between the way China does it in North Korea, or even the US versus France or the UK?
For Iran and North Korea, the Iranians have more flair when they show you parts of their program. So example being, we've never seen images. We've seen maybe 1 or 2 images of a North Korean missile base from the ground. And that's it. Like, they hold that card really close to their chest, where the Iranians will show you like the bathroom. Like, they'll take you around, they'll show you all the people that live there. They won't show you where it is, but they'll take you right into the site so that you know exactly what you're working with. They play kind of a different game when it comes to transparency and showing things off. And then for North Korea, I'm not sure how related this is, but when you're looking in like a valley in the middle of nowhere in North Korea, and then you see a security perimeter and then really nice apartments compared to the rest of the region, you know that they're investing heavily in whoever's working or living in that area. And that is usually more related to sensitive subjects like missile testing and production and the development and enrichment of nuclear material for weapons.
Okay.
We also study proliferation pathways and the way technology spreads. So identifying the parts of the fuel cycle that a different state is working at and the way they're doing it. If you start seeing that in a different state, then it can be cause for you to want to examine the relationship between those 2 states as well. And that's a well-documented practice of the IAEA and other intelligence agencies as well, in addition to the IAEA.
So the second of my dumb questions. So the North Koreans are obviously very smart, and they're pretty capable with this, given the constraints that they face, which are considerable. Surely they must know that these satellites are overhead, and surely they must know that good people like yourselves, and of course, obviously the U.S. government intelligence community, are paying a lot of attention to what's going on in these sites. So what is the probability, and how does one deal with it as an analyst, that they're building mock sites, for instance? Like, what would prevent them from building a warehouse that looks externally like their enrichment halls, and they put out some obelisks and whatever for memorials, and in order to throw you off. What would they do that? Yes or no? Why or why not?
I mean, the Soviet Union did that. They had Potemkin villages, so a lot of people think about that as well. I don't know if you have any favorite stories, Dave, about this type of thing.
I think for North Korea, they tend to hedge more on like, we want you to see it but not know what's going on. So an example would be at their submarine base, their main one on the East Coast, the Shimpo.
Shinpo, yeah.
They put covers over where the submarine would be in a kind of secure dock area for their SLBN program. So we can't see what they're doing to the sub. And that was a relatively recent thing. So they also have like a lot of just covered facilities. And I mean, this isn't necessarily the biggest factor or something I can come to you with paper and be like, I've proven it. But North Korea is not a really resource rich country. So, they're not the Soviet Union. They could probably make small mock-ups of things, but I don't think they would actually invest heavily into producing a massive fake village for the production of WMD things, right? It's not like a border town across the DMZ where you can throw up some really thin walls and maybe a tin roof or something and be like, look, that's a village. These facilities are generally much larger and grander and require a lot of time to build.
Yeah, I think with the ubiquity of information and sensors now, it's really hard to hide covert activity. I think that states now are trying to balance actively hiding without drawing additional attention, but it's really hard with satellites. If you put camouflage up, that is also a red flag saying, I'm hiding something here.
Yeah.
If you put these covers up immediately, people like Dave want to know what's there. So it's a fine balance between this, and different countries have taken different steps. There are some states like Israel, which may have very low physical security at certain facilities because they don't want to indicate that it is a sensitive site.
There's a trade-off. So there's a trade-off between the level of covertness and the ability to hide in plain sight, I guess, and sort of finding that balance must be kind of tough, I guess. David, it seemed like you were going to say something.
Actually, I was going to ask Melissa, because I know at a macro level how this all played out, but do you want to talk about the fake Byzantine tower in Syria that was a reactor, right? Like this, they do things like this, though. That's the...
No, it's a really good case. Dave and I used to teach together. I wish we could give our whole semester a lecture. But Syria was building a reactor, and near the city of Dimona, I think I have the wrong name there. They were building a reactor, and they actually built it underground, which was a remarkable amount of work. And then the very top portion of it was completely enclosed within a pretend Byzantine structure that you would sort of see dotted in that area. And they built it, so for a reactor, you need cooling. So typically we look for areas where you have water sources that you could pump in, and they built it far away from the nearest water source, and they really pumped that water a long distance to get it there. And that would have fooled me. I mean, that would have fooled probably a lot of people that are, particularly people who only do imagery analysis. And I think that did take some old-fashioned espionage, because the CIA later showed ground photos that someone must have taken of the outside of that facility and the inside of that facility before it was bombed by Israel.
Yeah, and then that was all before we had all the commercially available imagery that we have now. So we would never have caught that with the kind of like task and cross your fingers approach of doing imagery analysis, where Now, it would be a bit harder to get away with that depending on the resolution, but it's still a thing that we have to think about.
Okay, fascinating. How about we move on to the second topic? There's some breaking news, so to speak, that we're gonna get to have a first crack at here. We're feeling kind of privileged in this regard. So, David, why don't you go ahead and take over with your slides?
Sure. I'll try to make this brief because I realize we've got maybe 18 minutes left, so we have some more time for questions and whatnot. But let me see if I can do screen share. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me see if I can make this larger. Okay, so one of the bigger, hotter topics in watching North Korea and the proliferation of WMDs is the military parades and the big missiles. The bigger the missile it is, the more people want to try to dig into what North Korea's technological advancement is, what their ambitions are, where they're planning to structure their strategic deterrent and things of that nature. But the crucial limiting factor to this for the North Koreans is to have the vehicles to carry the missiles. You can have 100 missiles, but if you only have 20 trucks, like you aren't really making the best use of your missile fleet. So vehicle production in North Korea has been a topic of quite some debate because the North Koreans can make smaller trucks, but can they make larger trucks, which is the issue. During the last military parade in October, we saw the Hwasong-15, which is their biggest tested missile, on a vehicle that was an extended version of a Chinese vehicle that was sold to them for logging purposes or something along that line. So it gets a bit funky. But then they started parading around longer missiles for one that doesn't quite have a name yet. I think, Melissa, did you have a name for it?
Unfortunately, I was quoted in Reuters calling it a monster, and I just meant that it was big, but yes, that has gone viral, so people are now teasing me for calling it a monster missile.
When I first saw the Hwasong 12, the Wall Street Journal had me quoted as calling it like a Frankenstein missile because it just looked really, really weird, and it looked like it was a bunch of different things slapped together, so I totally get that. But we have to look at North Korea's questionable ability to produce larger tells, because you would say or think if they can make the missile and make nuclear weapons, which are both complex, why can't they make large trucks? Well, you have to take all the resources and specialty that you have and put it into one direction. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're spreading that all across the board. And these trucks need to be fairly complex and reliable because they're carrying their nuclear deterrent. Right, their nuclear force. So they have to be of a high enough grade that the North Koreans would trust their own work. But one of the things that we can do to study these sites is to look at sites that produce the trucks. In 2017, just before we saw the Hwasong-15, their largest, longest range ICBM, we were looking at a facility right here, just north of Pyongyang in Pyeongsan. And this facility produces trucks. We had seen that the North Koreans took the Hwasong-15 out of this building and took it to its launch location, which is now a memorial, which is really interesting. And you can see that in satellite imagery as well. But they started adding this weird tower structure right here. And when you produce a TEL, a transporter, erector, launcher, you need to make sure that the vehicle, the truck that carries the missile, can take the missile horizontally and raise it to launch it. So what they would do is they would build this temporary structure that's very tall. If you look at the shadows of this building, you can get a general sense of how tall the building is. So you can see that this building, which looks fairly tall, has a shadow that's this long. And right next to it, in front of the entrance to this building, we have this shadow, which is maybe twice as tall. So they would bring the missile out, they would erect the arm, practice that a couple times, and then drive it away to another location or put it back in the structure.
So can I just jump in and ask a question real quick? Do you have, like, for instance, software to look at these photos that tells you how tall the building probably is? Like, you said it's fairly tall, but surely you must have a better idea than that, and you're not trying to, like, not nerd on us, but I want you to nerd on us and sort of let us know a little bit how that works.
It's algebra. Yeah.
Yeah, you should do that.
Oh, no, I didn't teach Dave. He's a natural. Yeah, no, because you know when the image was taken, you know what time and what season it is. So essentially you can do the calculation of the angle of the sun on the building And so as long as you know the size of one object, then you can calculate the rest of it. So certainly there are many softwares where you can measure pixel by pixel how far apart something is. And if you measure the shadow, then you can do the calculation to see at that day, at that time, the angle of the sun and learn how tall the building is.
Or if you want to be lazy about it, you can use a program called SketchUp, right? Or is it SketchUp? Yeah, where you take the imagery. It's like a tertiary tier architectural software. It's really easy to use though. You can import the imagery, match up the sizing of everything, and then you can actually just build the structure. And then once the shadow and the time of day are matched in the software, you can measure the height of the building when the shadows match. And you can do that as well. And then just for like an eyeball assessment, we do have ground images of this site. So you can see standing from a distance and be like, okay, well, clearly this is like, you know, if I'm going to eyeball, like this is a 12 tall building or something like that. It's not for analysis, but just like general understanding of what you're looking at.
Okay, got it. Just another dumb question to jump in here. Sorry, I'm going to do the same thing to you that I did to Melissa, and I'm going to interrupt you constantly. You know, to what extent is what you're doing here with this open source analysis? You mentioned the word algorithm earlier, and that like made something, you know, ping off in my head here. To what extent is what you're doing susceptible to being done with artificial intelligence? Is there a way that we can do machine learning that makes your work go faster? I mean, obviously you would still be there kind of monitoring what's going on, but how is AI potentially going to affect what it is that you do?
So I think Melissa's going to have to jump in after me because she's far more well-versed on this topic. But essentially, the whole purpose of using machine learning and AI and change detection is to streamline the process of the analyst or interpreter, so they're not wasting time looking at images that aren't useful. I don't think we're even remotely close to getting to a point where we will replace analysis altogether with machines. Like the human element of that is very vital. Because we still can't like replicate the human brain in a metal box, right? But generally, when I'm looking at the site and when I'm doing my analysis, and I'm pretty sure Melissa is doing it the same way, it's kind of just like a brute force scan, which takes a lot of time. So I'm looking at sites, and then the last example, I'll give you an example. I was looking at this site maybe 3 times a week for a year or more. I've got a list of sites that I just have to manually comb over to see if things are changing. Where when you use like a machine learning algorithm or a change detection feature, you can actually have the robot, if you would, or the computer do all that work for you. So when something interesting does change, it can bring my attention to a location and I can do further analysis.
Yeah, there's another technique that is useful. You were asking how we find these sites, you know, out of all of North Korea. And so one of the things that I tend to use is surface-to-air missile sites, because wherever there's a cluster of surface-to-air missile sites, there's probably something important that's being protected. It might be military, it might be a villa, I don't know. But it still does a kind of triage where I don't have to search the whole area, but if I know the proximate area and that there are clusters of surface-to-air missiles, then I start looking there first. So an algorithm that can identify the pattern of surface-to-air missiles in an image is very useful to me because it can help me identify those things without doing this really tedious grid brute force kind of searching that we're describing to you. So like Dave said, artificial intelligence is not going to replace the human ever, but it can help save some time by sifting through data faster than we can and then turning our attention to the important things.
Super, thanks. By all means, David, continue. I'm sorry for interrupting you earlier.
You've got great questions, so please go ahead. So we saw the structure go up, and then something strange started happening where they started taking it down and then putting it back up. This one's a bit further. You can see the shadow of the terrace structure right here. So it's a symbol they just didn't have whatever slide they did first time around. So they've done this, I think, 4 or 5 times that we had. They would build the structure, it would be there, and they would take it down. There would be 2 weeks passing, and then they would put it back up again. So the idea was that they were just building the structure to test the arm function of the tail, and And then when they didn't need it, they would take it down and reassemble it again, I guess, to throw off the analysts who are watching the site. But as of mid to late last year, instead of just using the structure, what they did was add an entire new facility to the back end of it where they don't actually have to test that feature. And if we remember that one structure a couple of slides earlier, we can see that this is very tall. It's narrow, so the truck can fit in and can kind of go in an arc motion from top and back down. What they did was they built a more permanent structure where they would drive the truck through, move the truck here, and they would test the arm raising feature with this very strange U-shaped structure. Another really interesting thing in higher resolution imagery that I don't have for this presentation is that on this side, there are windows. On this side, there are windows. But on this side and that side, there are no windows whatsoever. What's happening here? So whatever's happening here is totally closed off from the rest of this strangely built building. But they're doubling down and investing in the ability to produce and, I guess, test for quality assurance the longer range or the larger tells for their long range missiles. This takes me back to something that is often not looked at, which is the shorter range systems. One of the things that kind of reinforces in my mind North reluctance to build more rugged off-road built trucks is that whenever they have a big system or a new system, they can't recycle something. What they do is they throw it on a tank chassis because North Koreans can make tanks. That's a thing they've been doing for quite some time. So they've been doing this with a lot of their newer solid fuel missile systems. So what I wanted to know was like what are they planning to do with the site that produces the tracked chassis for their newer system? A lot of their newer solid fuel systems are going on tracked vehicles. So let's turn our attention to that site. And as of like 2 months ago, we saw that they had added this large square. So it might be a bit hard to see with 3-meter resolution, but essentially this is the foundation for an entirely new factory floor at their tank plant. And with all these new solid fuel systems that are coming out, they're going to need more vehicles, and they're going to be producing these vehicles here. There are probably some proliferation concerns in this as well, because if North Korea increases the ability to produce tracked missile launchers, and they're still interested in trying to make money off of arms sales, where are these going to go? If they're investing heavily in the production of tracked vehicles, are they going to just produce what they need and then stop, or are they going to produce what they need and then find a way to make revenue for the country by exporting it to other countries who are interested in shorter range systems that are generally less intimidating compared to their longer range nuclear cousins or alternatives? We know that this site was related to the production of truck tails because the launcher for the Pugluksong 2 was first seen being assembled here. This is prior to the Pugluksong 2's launch, and we can see that they're actually using other images geolocated to this tank production facility. So
sorry, just to let everybody know, the Pugluksong 2 is a medium range, right. Solid fuel land launched, and the 3 is the medium range SLBM, correct?
Correct. The 1 is the SLBM, the 2 is the land variant, the 3 is for the submarine, and then the 4 is notionally for the submarine as well. But that's a whole other issue in of itself.
And that's the new one that they paraded on October 10, correct?
Yeah, it is. The 4 with the Korean S. People were calling it the 4A, but I forgot how to say the word for the Korean S, but it's the Korean S. So that's actually a whole other topic though, because while I can't say that's not something that they have, the mock-up that they paraded around looked kind of underwhelming compared to things they've done in the past. And certain features didn't match up with the actual cold launched solid fuel systems that they had paraded previously. So I think that was more like a notional design of something that they wanted us to think that they're doing, but not actually the missile itself.
You heard it here first. David Schmerler says that that's a fake missile. So.
Well, at least the one on the truck. I'm not saying that they're not going to test one soon, but
I'm kidding. I'm not putting words in your mouth.
We've done better mock-ups. So this is the site previously. We can see that there hasn't been any changes, so this is the base image for the comparison we're about to do. This building right here was previously the largest warehouse that they added in 2016. And the year after that, we saw the Pugluksong 2 tail. So North Korea invested in their tank producing area, their tank, tank plant And then after they increased their ability to produce tracked vehicles at the site, we started to see the new tracked launchers the year after and the year after that. Then after, actually I have the slides over here. So after August 6th, we saw that there was some ground clearing activity. I'll go back and forward so you can see the difference. This blue structure right here is now gone. And then this area right here is all cleared out. We still have a little bit of buildings here and whatnot. And then after August 30th, we can see a larger structure starting to take place right here. So we've got a flat concrete area with the shadows here being the outer walls of what will be the new production facility. And we can see that happening here too with kind of like a gray shell or a gray box, which will be another site that they've added. And I'm not quite sure what they're even going to do with that one, but the one on the south is far more interesting. And then we have the more recent image from November 13th, where we can see the walls are a bit more clear. And if you want to have the sense of scale for 3-meter imagery to understand that, I mean, this is larger than that. This is what that looked like being built from the ground. So that's a large plant that you can just, I mean, that's like a truck over there. So just for a sense of comparison, that's huge. And then this one that they're building right now is going to be even larger. So the implications are that they're going to be dramatically expanding their ability to produce tracked vehicles. And since the tracked vehicles for their missile program are most likely produced here, that has implications for North Korea's short to medium range missile launch capabilities.
Which really get under appreciated, I think. I mean, everyone focuses on the big ICBMs, but these short solid fuel missiles are the ones I find really destabilizing.
Right, because that's going to be, I guess, pointed at South Korea, and then depending on the higher range from the medium systems at Japan as well. So that's really what's going to make up the bulk of the regional missile use. So it's not just like Americans only care because we can now get hit by North Korean missiles. But the thing that was always a big issue prior to the ICBM were the medium range systems. So that's a thing. And then finally, not only is this plant seeing dramatic expansion, so we can see this kind of out in this valley. Over here is where they launched the Hwasong 12 for the first time, where they also did the checkout, I believe, at that building. But they're adding a smaller structure right there, which has been hard to see. And I'm not sure what the purpose of that's going to be, so I just noted it. But these are both facilities that are related to the production and testing of vehicles for their missile program. So these sites are expanding, they're being refurbished, and it's not really making it in the news now because I guess the conflict with North Korea is over. I don't know how else to make the joke of whatever that was, but yeah, that's kind of what's happening. So.
Well, Donald Trump has told us that the North Korea problem has been solved, so there's no reason to even pay attention anymore. That is really fascinating stuff, and I wish that we had more time to let you both, as Melissa intimated, give your course for us. Alas, we don't. So let's take the last 5 minutes or so, I think, before we need to wrap things up. And if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions to sort of dig a little bit deeper, more generally, into open source. So I was at a conference in I want to say 15. And this was in Washington at a think tank. And our lunch keynote used to be a very important person in the U.S.-North Korea nuclear relationship. And this particular person during his keynote, I said he, so I've already given one thing away, darn. This person, he or she, sort of disparaged, I guess you would say, the open source imagery analysis. This person sort of took a side shot at 38 North. And I don't remember exactly the context, but it was basically the point of saying, yeah, those people, they think like they know all the stuff that's going on, but I can tell you that they don't know everything or whatever. And my question, I guess, what is, in your estimation, to the extent that you might have, had an idea of this, what is in your estimation, the gap between the intelligence imagery gathered by governments and what good non-government analysis, such as yourselves, have to work with via commercial imagery?
That's a good question. I mean, neither Dave nor I have ever worked in intelligence. So I think we're part of this first wave with Jeffrey Lewis and Jenny Town and others who've never worked in intelligence and have only worked in open source. So technically we can't tell you what it's like inside intelligence, but I think that increasingly the US government is realizing they can't only rely on the NRO to provide them what they need, and they are using commercial imagery more and more. So we're starting to use the same tools, but you know, Dave and I can't use HUMINT, and we can't do a number of things that governments can do. And our techniques are developed in the open. So what we can do is broadly shared and can be disputed. It's hard to know what the gap is. You should ask someone inside intelligence, I guess, to really answer that well, but I would guess that it's narrowing, essentially.
My hope was that maybe you were at a conference somewhere and you got someone in intelligence sufficiently drunk that maybe they said, you guys are doing great work, but you're still really far behind us. Or they said, wow, you guys are doing great work, and wow, you guys are really catching up. So I guess I was hoping for maybe something like that, but.
I can't confirm or deny on a YouTube.
I would like to raise the Iran satellite image tweet from President Trump, right, or Donald Trump. The resolution on that was like unbelievable. With the best stuff that we can use that's commercially legal and available for us to purchase, we can make out a lot of really interesting details. But then the president tweeted out a picture of the blown up Iranian space launch vehicle on a pad, and you could almost make out like people and like all sorts of things. So, like, even though Melissa and I have never worked for any intelligence agency, if you want to know about like the technological gap, it's that when I saw that photo, I thought it was like taken from the site. Like they had a drone like maybe a couple 100 feet off the ground, and that was pretty much from a satellite, right, Melissa? So they're able to make out a lot more detail than we can. But again, I think the pro side to doing a lot of open source work, especially in our field, is that one, not every country has the capability to do that.
Yeah,
so we provide something that is publicly available that public can interact with. If let's say we go back to like Iraq 2, right? When we went in there, we had a bunch of false information and whatnot to kind of sell the invasion. If a government source came out and said, I've got satellite images of the site, it is what I'm saying it is, but he doesn't show it to you because it's classified. Now the open source site can come in and be like, well, we can get pictures of that too. They won't be as good, but they should be sufficient enough to back up whatever claim you're trying to sell us on. So in a way, we're doing just work that is easier to share, I guess, and kind of publicly digestible. Also, if a government wants to share intelligence with another country without exposing what that one government can do, they can refer to open source reports that they believe without exposing their means and methods.
In a way, I mean, not in a way, when Trump released that image, he did damage a lot of sources and methods because just as I calculated the shadow length to figure out what it was, that image at that time, astronomers were able to identify which satellite it was, where it was, the name of the satellite, and we can calculate the resolution based on that image alone. And if we can do it, then certainly all other governments that pay attention to such things can as well. So, I mean, the value of using Planet and Maxar and Airbus and CoreSat and all these different is that we can share them because they're commercial and we're not giving away a government's capability. But and I think it evens the information playing field too. I mean, particularly with a country like North Korea, they have to feel threatened, regardless of how you feel about North Korea. They legitimately feel threatened by the US and South Korea and Japan, and rightly so. And so if you can share information in such a way that relieves some of their concerns and fears, you're less likely to have an accident or some kind of misunderstanding that leads to a nuclear case. And I think there's a lot of value in open source there, although Dave and I, as US persons, are very limited in what we can share with North Korea.
Yeah. Look, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. This was fascinating. This was everything that I hoped it would be and more. I guess I'll sign off with two things, and then I'll let you maybe have whatever last word you would like to have. I'm amazed by two things. I mean, I'm amazed by lots of things, but in this particular case, I'm amazed by two things. The first of which is that we have these satellites, which apparently are relatively small, if I'm understanding correctly, and we're able to put hundreds, if not thousands of them in an orbit around planet Earth and take pictures with these incredible resolutions. I think that's just astonishing. And, you know, the United States has turned so anti-science over the last 10 or 20 years. It's kind of sad to think that that's taking place at the same time that we're able to do this absolutely amazing technological wizardry. And the second thing I'm amazed by is the fact that we have people like you who are able to take this information and turn it into usable products that are, you know, absolutely, you know, fabulous tools for researchers and strategists who, you know, can't or don't have the time to be able to do this themselves. And so it's a really an excellent tool for people like myself and others, not only in North Korea, but also, you know, interested in other countries as well and in other regions. And so we thank you for all of the effort and what I think is quite a bit of occasional tedious attention that has to be paid to detail work. So thank you for that and for all of your efforts. I'll let you have whatever last word it is that you want to say.
So I would just like to make an invitation. I mean, Dave and I learned by practicing together and studying and comparing things to what we know. It's hard work and there aren't a lot of curriculums to learn how to do this. But I would particularly invite people in Korea and all around the world to join and do this work with us, because the type of people doing it now are distinctly American and male, and we need more diverse opinions and ideas about what is happening, because the errors really creep in when you're a foreigner that does not understand what is happening in that context. So the more Koreans who join in open source research, particularly students and fellows and professors at Hankook, have an opportunity to, for example, join the Datayo.org website, where we have imagery, text data, photos and videos that you can analyze. And we have some instructional materials as well to help us, essentially. More hands make light work, as we say in English. And I think the better the intelligence product if we're inclusive about who's doing analysis.
Excellent point.
I absolutely agree. That's a much better way of saying what I'm thinking about what you were talking. The more eyes we have on the imagery, the better the work's going to be. It's not easy work, but if you're passionate about it, you find it interesting. I mean, I started doing this just because I thought North Korea was like it was a mysterious thing, and I wanted to learn more about it. And Melissa showed me Google Earth, and I'm like, oh, I can do this was, but I didn't know like you could do all this work with it. And since I've started in this field, like the mediums, technology, and access have only been increasing. So more eyes on the pictures, the better I think the collective understanding of the work is going to be.
Super, thanks a lot. Thanks to people like you, North Korea is less of a black box than it was before. So we're grateful for that. We're also grateful to everyone who has watched this presentation today. Thank you on behalf of the Asia Society Korea for sticking through this. We hope that you found it interesting. Please join us again in December for our next roundtable. We haven't decided what that's going to be yet, but I'm sure that it will be fascinating as well. So please join me in thanking Melissa Hanham and David Schmerler from the Open Nuclear Network and from the Center for Nonproliferation Studies, respectively. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.